Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Thorben. I hope you grabbed your cup of coffee or other beverage you prefer and have a great time at your, let me change that real quick, and then that you have a good time in general. So yeah, last week we had to skip the Coffee with Thorben stream, unfortunately. Well, not really unfortunately to me, to be honest, because I was teaching in a dedicated online workshop for a customer. But yeah, now we can have a few more streams. Most likely not on a daily basis like we did about 2 weeks ago. But I definitely want to make this a regular thing and do a stream once a week. Sometimes with guests, sometimes like we do today, where I just answer questions from the chat or try to catch up with the questions that I got asked on my blog on the YouTube channel. So if you can hear me fine, please say hello in the chat. And while I'm waiting for the first response, I start with answering the question from Vladislav. Hello, I would like to know when and how to put select statement on Hibernate transaction. Is it worth to do? Yes, you should always start a transaction before doing anything with Hibernate. You can perform read operations without starting a transaction, but Hibernate will then open the transaction, execute the select statement, and then close the transaction again. And that puts a lot of pressure on your database because they always have to flush the, at the end of the transaction, they have to flush all the changes to the hard drive, and that's a pretty expensive operation. And I mean, that's probably obvious. It creates much less effort to start the transaction once, then perform all operations and then close it at the end, in comparison to opening and closing it for each and every statement. Okay. Then I hope that answers your question. Then I would say we just go to switch to the browser. Let me rearrange a few things here real quick. Yeah, we go to the browser, answer a few questions, and then I always have an eye on the chat. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you have any comments about the stream or whatever you want to talk about, feel free to join the conversation. So I picked a few comments from the blog. So I wrote an article on how to map an enum to a database column with Hibernate. So there are different versions. You can use an ordinal, which is the numeric version of the enum. You can use a string. These are the two standard versions. You can also use an attribute converter to write your own enum to database column mapping. And I have also an article for that. But here the question was, I have a column that uses enum type ordinal. I want to change it to enum type string, but how do I convert the old data? Well, that's a good question in general. It's not really Hibernate related. How do you change that? The best approach would probably be add a new column and then fill the column based on the data that's stored in the old column. So then you write an update statement that converts the old value into the new one. So let me quickly type that. Attorney, you need to do that outside of Hibernate. My recommendation would be to use Flyway or Juke to Flyway or Liquibase to perform the database update, database migration. The migration process needs to consist of 2 steps. You first add the new column, and then you execute an SQL update statement to fill that column based on the previous ordinal value. Okay. So first question done. Let me quickly take a look here at the stream setup. Yeah. Okay, next question. So what do we have here? 5 ways to initialize lazy associations and when to use them. Yeah, so the general issue with lazy associations is that if you try to access them, Hibernate has to fetch the data, right? I mean, that's intended. In the beginning, you just, well, in general, you want to fetch all association lazily, just to make sure that you don't fetch any data that you don't need in your use case. But then if you need a specific association, you need to fetch it in some way. Sure, you can call the association like here. I don't recommend that. It creates n+1 select issues. It's relatively slow. What's much better is using join fetch clauses, or do the same with the fetch method in a criteria query, or use an entity graph or a dynamically created entity graph. So what's the question here? Question said, you should mention that multiple join fetch in the same query create a cross join, and this could have a huge performance impact and never use more than one. Well, that's not exactly right. Multiple join fetch clauses don't cause a cross join. Let me check. I found an example for that in one of my projects. Yeah. So here we have a query that selects an entity and join fetches authors and reviews. So if we run this query, then and take a look at the log, then we see that there's no cross join, but we joined the book via the book author association table with the author, and then we join it with the review. So now we have created a pretty huge product, and we also include all the columns here in the select clause. So the result set of that query is relatively big, especially if you don't limit it to one specific book as I do here. The issue there is you now get the book as many times as there are authors multiplied with the number of reviews for that book. So if that book was written by 3 authors and you have 100 reviews, you get 300 records back in the result set. That's just how relational databases and SQL work in general, right? So that's a normal thing. The issue here is now that this slows down the query dramatically, especially for bigger associations. And because of that, you should be very careful with using multiple join fetch clauses in one query. In general, I don't like to make any hard recommendations like never use more than 1 or maybe 2 join fetch clauses, because that totally depends on the number of elements that are in the association and the kind of entities to which you join that you join with your query. I mean, if you say a fixed number of join fetches is an issue, then you say, okay, it's the same if you join a publisher to the book, which just has a few attributes and is a to-one association, then that would be the same as joining the reviews where you have several hundred or thousands. And I mean, it's obvious that that's not the case, right? So joining the reviews join fetching the reviews with the book on a huge shop application can break your application even if it's the first join fetch clause, just because you have a few thousand reviews for that specific book. So yeah, in general, I don't say there should be any fixed recommendations on how many join fetches you should have. More than 2, you should start thinking about performance testing your query and making sure that it performs well. And I would say more than 4, maybe 5 is a code smell, and a pretty bad one. Doesn't mean that it doesn't work. Can be totally fine, but in general, it's a bad idea. So yeah, let's answer that question. Hi, Christian. That's completely right. No, hi, Christian. Multiple join fetch clauses don't cause a cross join. Just to make sure that everyone understands what's the difference here. So a cross join would have been that would be a different kind of join here, for example. So what we do here is we define it, we use an inner join, and we have a clear and we have an on condition on that query. That means that the database can reduce the number of records in the 2 affected tables before or while doing the join. The cross join would be just a list of comma separated tables, and then the instead of an on clause, we would have a where condition down here. And Christian is right, that can slow down your query. It totally depends on your query optimizer. Some query optimizers recognize, okay, this should be an inner join, and they replace it. But if you keep that kind of join, then yeah, that can be a performance issue. Okay. Let's go back to the question and answer it. Hi, Christian. Multiple join fetch clauses don't cause cross join. But they create a product which can become a performance issue. That's why I agree with you that you should be careful with the number of entities that you number of join fetch clauses in your query. Depending on the cardinality of your association, 1 to 3 join fetches can be okay. If the cardinality of your associations is low, can be okay. But if only one of them contains several hundred or 1,000 records, that one on its own, it's already cause performance issues. Do a quick spell check. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so far there's a pretty one-sided conversation. Do you have any questions, or shall I explain anything more about the questions that I'm answering here? And what do we think in general about this format? Should I keep it, or should we go back to a more conversation style cover with Thorben? What do you prefer? Okay, say both book and manuscript tables are empty. How do you save a new record to the book entity? That's the one where we use the same primary key for a one-to-one association. Yeah, well, in this case, we have the book, and the manuscript uses the maps ID annotation on the book association. That means it reuses the primary key value. And that means we need to persist the book. We can't persist the manuscript without a book. New record to the book entity. Persisting a new book entity isn't an issue. The primary key value gets generated during the persist operation. But you can't persist a manuscript entity without a book. So the code to persist the new book would be book B, so it's new book, and persist B. Okay. I know, thanks for your help. I tried doing this, but nothing changed on my sort bar. I basically need every null value to be equal to -1, but it doesn't seem to work. Order list add, builder desk, builder desk. Okay, child -1. That, to be honest, looks okay. Let's see. Yeah. Secure order by, builder desk, desk. Okay, what's this article about? So, handing of null values in queries can be an issue. Well, handing null values in your order by clause in queries can be an issue. The thing with the criteria query, well, with JPQL, you can handle that with with SQL, you can handle it as well. Unfortunately, not with the criteria query. There you need a workaround. And that's what I did here. So I used the criteria builder to call the coalesce function. And that's a database function that returns the first value that is not null. And then I reference the publishing date column of the book, and in this case, a default local date, which is the max date. So that means that all records that have no publishing date will use the max date of the database for this order by clause. And due to that, and at the descending should be the end of the list, right? And you can then see that here, order by coalesce desk. And then, oh no, it's the beginning of the list. Okay. So this actually looks okay. Frank, okay. The code of your query, please. So yeah, that should be okay. So we have a question in the chat. Oops. sorry, I will most likely butcher your name. Vyacheslav. Hi Torben, are you planning to release any MongoDB related content? Thank you. Um, well, maybe it will definitely not become the main topic on this side, simply because of way more experience with Hibernate and relational databases. Due to microservices and a few projects that I'm working on as a consultant, that might be that I might add something about MongoDB every now and then, but right now it's not really planned. Sorry. Okay. So what article is this one here? Yeah. So ordering versus sorting with Hibernate, what should you use? Oh yeah, that's an interesting thing. So a lot of developers are not aware of the differentiation between sorting and ordering in Hibernate. So you can, for example, annotate in association with the sort natural annotation or with a sort comparator. And then you are sorting your the elements in that association in your Java application. Here with the comparator that you are referencing, and here based on the natural order. And that is in general not a great idea, because the database is optimized for these kinds of use cases. It can do that way better than whatever we do in our application code. So if you want to always order or always get the elements of an association in the same order, you should at least annotate your association with an order by annotation. That will add, you can see that down here, that will add the order by clause to the query that Hibernate generates to fetch the entity. But before you do that, please think carefully about all the use cases that you have in your application. Do you really need that order for all of them each and every time you fetch in this case, the book association? I doubt that. In my experience, you need it for some use cases, but not for most of them. And then ordering and sorting is a bad idea. Ordering is just a little bit less bad than the sorting, because it's more efficient to handle it on the database. But it's still a bad idea, because it creates an overhead, and a completely useless overhead if you don't need the association in that specific order. So my recommendation would be to avoid sorting, avoid ordering, and order either in a custom JPQL query or in the front end if you really need to. But in most cases, just execute a custom JPQL query or criteria query and apply the order there. If you say, okay, I always need the association in that specific order, okay, if you're really sure about that, then please use the order by annotation and define here the attributes and the direction in which the association shall be ordered. Tom, thanks for this. I was wondering if it's possible to order by an alias. For example, say I have a calculated field with an alias named relevance. Is it possible to order the result list by this? Trying something like the following, where I can only pick fields from the entity for ordering. Say I want to sort by relevance score and then by the name, which is a field. I thought that this should be possible. Let's get into the IDE and give it a try. So he was using a criteria query. I probably have a criteria example here. Criteria query order by. It's ordered by, right? No, that's query pagination. No, it's an order by. Okay. Okay, let's copy this one. So here we do CQ multi-select, root get book title as my title. Not S. Alias. Alias my title. And if I now copy that here and call it add for attribute and put that there and that, oops, there. No. What have I done? So that works. Okay. Interesting. To be honest, I'm not sure when I did that for the last time. So I would have expected that we can do this. But that's obviously not possible. We get there, we get a string path, and that is a selection. Interesting. Well, one thing we could do is we could do this. So that would work. Then we would have the alias in the query, but there we have a path. But that's not exactly what we were looking for, right? Hi Matt, hi Utups. Jenny, I will take a look at your question in a minute. Let me just check if I can figure this one out. So if anyone in the chat has an idea what would allow us to order by an alias with the criteria API, just feel free to post. Right now, the idea that I had obviously didn't work. Normally, I don't use an alias in or at least not too often in a criteria query, because you can easily define your variables here and then reference them wherever you need them. But yeah, it looks like that has to be an expression, right? And the alias obviously isn't an expression. It's a selection. Yeah, so this would be my best guess for that question. And that doesn't even work? Because probably not found. That looks like a different problem. Oh, hey. Created the wrong query here. So create a tuple query. And then do it like this. Okay. So the issue there was I told Hibernate that I want to select books, but then down here I selected a list of titles, and Hibernate obviously wasn't able to instantiate the book entity based on that string. And there I need to get, okay, in this case I can do my title. Check if the alias works. Yeah, not great, but an option. Okay, no, this one. Julius, it seems like you can't order by an alias, and you can do something like this. Oops. Let me fix the indent real quick. Something like this. You can store the reference to the attribute. Path reference to the attribute you want to select a variable. Use that one in your select clause and assign it an alias. In the order by clause, you can then use the path. In the next step, you can define the order by clause using the path. Okay, so there was a question by Jenny and promised to answer. So, hi Thorben, I have a question about transactions and at scheduled. I had a lot of trouble getting it to work correctly as it did not commit to database, and I'm still not confident in the process. I have a service for the cron jobs which has auto-write services which contain the methods I want to run. simply adding a transaction did not help or did not work always. First question there, when did it work and when did it not work? Only by adding transactional propagation requires new, it started to work, but now I have this annotation on every level possible with the right location for the annotation. You should, well, that depends on how you implemented your cron job. Wait a second, you wrote that you used the scheduled annotation. Shall the method that you annotated with scheduled run within the same transaction? If yes, then I would put it on that method. If not, then I would put the transactional annotation on the first method that you, well, on the method on the highest level that gets called by the scheduled method. So your scheduled method either runs as part of the transaction or it calls another method that triggers the business code. And you either put it on the method that performs the business operations, or you put it on the scheduled annotation. Both of them can work totally fine. You just have to decide, should each call of that business operation run in its own transaction, or should everything run within one huge transaction? Another thing you need to be aware of is all these transactions are only effective if your call goes through a proxy. That means if you call a method on the same object that you're currently working on, the annotations are not processed, and that's because all the annotation or the code that gets triggered by this or added by this annotation is provided in a proxy class that wraps your actual class. So if you want to activate the, in this case, transaction, you need to make sure that you injected your business bean component class, whatever you have there, into the class that runs as your cron job, so that that either Spring or your Java EE server were able to generate the proxy that wraps your object, and then by that to add the required code for that transaction management. That would be a common mistake there, that you didn't annotate the scheduled method with transactional, and then called another method within that same object and expected that the annotations were effective and would start the transaction. That's a pretty common thing, and to be honest, I messed that up a few times myself. So that happens quite regularly. Hi, New. Okay. So, Johnny, if you're still there, please let me know if I answered your question or if we shall get into more details there. So, what do we have here? Hibernate tips, how to avoid Hibernate's multiple back fetch exception. Yeah. So, if you have multiple join fetches within one query, and oh, okay, Jenny says he's still confused. Okay, let me give it another try. Okay, you have two options. You have right now you have a method that's annotated with scheduled. If you want to have everything that's part of this scheduled job run within the same transaction, then it should be more than good enough to annotate that method that currently has the scheduled annotation also with the transactional annotation, and that should start the transaction and keep it active until the job is done. So that would be the simple approach. If you run a job that does multiple independent things. Like, for example, you run a job that selects a bunch of records from the database and then performs certain operations for each of these records. And you want to have that these operations independent of each other. Let's say first selecting all orders in your bookstore application, and then you want to trigger a certain business operation for each of these orders. But each operation shall be independent of the others. And failure, for example, shall not roll back all the other operations that you did there. Then you would not annotate your scheduled method with the transaction annotation. Then you would annotate the business method that that you call for each order with that transaction and start the transaction there. As a result, the scheduled method would run without a transaction, and then each business operation would start its own transaction and commit and or roll back its own transaction. Okay, I hope that clarifies that a little bit. So Nuno asks, can you please clarify how ORM works when there is an inheritance relation between entities? What's the best strategy to adopt? Oh, yeah, I can give you a quick summary of that. So inheritance strategies and when to use which one is a pretty huge topic. So in my workshops and in the advanced Hibernate online training that you can find on my site, we spent more than an hour with including exercises and stuff on that topic. So let me try to summarize that. You have different variations. You can probably have an example here. Yeah. No, there. So the easiest approach is you annotate your superclass with mapped superclass, and then your subclasses, but and not with an entity. That makes publication not an entity, it's just a Java class. It's not managed by Hibernate. And then you can annotate other classes with add entity and let them extend the publication. So what happens here is publication is not an entity, but it has mapping information. And Hibernate will apply all the mapping information that you defined here on that class. Oh, I'm sorry. Now you can see the code. So let's start at the beginning. So here we have a publication with book and blog post as subclasses. And what you can do here is you can annotate your publication with mapped superclass and put a few mapping annotations here, define attributes and stuff. In the subclass, which then extends the publication, you annotate then the subclass with that entity, and then this book class becomes an entity. That means all these objects are managed and it inherits the mapping information that you have here. So the book and the blog post are mapped to its own database tables. And there's, on an entity level, there's no association between these two entities. Book and blog post are completely independent of each other. You can't define any polymorphic queries or associations or anything. And then you have a few other association inheritance mappings. You can do table per class, single table, joint, which then use different mapping approaches. So here, in all of these three, the publication becomes an entity. So that enables you to define polymorphic queries and to do polymorphic associations. And then you annotate your entity with an inheritance annotation and define the inheritance type. Table per class maps each subclass to its own database table. So these are completely independent. Each table contains all the columns of that specific entity class. That means in this case, publication, book, and blog post get their own database tables, but you can still use a many-to-many association to a publication. Then you can do inheritance joined. Inheritance joined. The table structure is different. So the entity declaration looks almost the same. The only difference is you have joined here instead of single table. But now the publication entity class gets mapped to the publication database table, and the book and blog post only get mapped to their tables as well, but the book table only contains the column specific for that book class. So in this case, only num pages, and the ID, which is also a foreign key reference to the publication table, and the same for the blog post. That makes polymorphic queries a little bit easier, but it always requires a join for each select statement that gets a specific subclass. And then you can put everything into one table. That's called single table. So then we have a huge database table that contains all columns of the publication, plus the columns of the that map the book attributes and the columns that map the blog post attributes. So there we put everything into one table, and that makes the queries very efficient, but you can add any foreign key constraints on columns that are not mapped by, no, you can't put any not null constraints on any columns that are not mapped by all entity classes. So this means you can't define that the URL has to be set for a blog post, at least not on the table model. You would need to do that on the entity level. Yeah, so that would be the quick rundown. If you want to dive deeper into that, you can find a blog article about that on thoughtsonjava.org, or take a look at the Advanced Hibernate online course. Right now, I'm offering the course to everyone who's interested. So if you join the waitlist there, you will get a few emails, and shortly afterwards you will be able to join the course if you want. Okay, Manoga asks, hi Thorben, is there any annotation for request interceptor in boot? For request interceptor, I'm not exactly sure what kind of interceptor you're asking for here. So you can use the lifecycle interceptors of Hibernate with Spring Boot as well. So Spring Data JPAs just sits on top of JPA and Hibernate and provides some additional functionality. So you can use all the Hibernate features there as well. Why no op constructor for JPA? What do you mean by no op constructor, Smoky Kid? Do you mean a constructor without arguments? So default constructor. I'm using these here. There's no constructor defined. Same here. And that's required by JPA in general, so you need to have a default constructor. Yeah, okay. So the default constructor is always required by JPA, so that Hibernate or any other JPA implementation can instantiate a new entity object based using this default constructor, and then either call setter methods or use reflection to set the different attributes. But yeah, in this case, I didn't define any constructor on my classes, so there's the Java default constructor, which is automatically available. Okay, then okay, so if you change the collection to a set, how will you be able to add multiple new entities to the collection, even if you add them one by one and have save code to the child entity? You run into a problem if the entity manager does not flush between the new entities to the parent entity. Well, no, that depends on the implementation of your equals method. So if you decide to override equals and hash code in your entities, you need to make sure that I saw an equals method somewhere here. You need to make sure that you check in your equals implementation if the primary key attribute is null or not. And if the primary key attribute is null, then it has to be, just see the implementation here, isn't that great? Let me check, what did I do here? So what you should do is, if at least one of the primary key attributes is null, so if the primary key of that entity or the other entity is null, then the two then equals has to return false. So what do we do here? If the object reference is equal, then it's true. It's false. Okay. Not gonna get ID. It's not null. Then let's make this right. So in general, I recommend to not implement your equals and hashcode methods because it's in most cases it isn't necessary. It's only necessary if you detach and merge your entities, and if you then want to be able to merge entities that then want to work with detached and managed entities at the same time. In all other cases, the object equals and hashcode methods are more than good enough. And in case that that you implement it, as I said, you always need to make sure that an entity that has no primary key value is never equal to any other entity, because otherwise you can't add multiple entities to the set. Oh, did it again and didn't show you the code. Sorry for that. Yes. That will get better. It's the first time that I'm doing a stream like this. So yeah, the important part is this part here. If the primary key attribute of this blog post entity is null, then equals return false. It doesn't matter what else is going on there. So that always has to be false. Okay, let's get back to the question, and I quickly answer that one. So apply. Depends on your equals. On the equals implementation of your entity. In most cases, I don't recommend to equals. And if you do, you need to make sure that an entity object with a null primary key value. You make sure the entity object with a null primary key value is never equal to another entity object. Okay, so what's this? What's Grammarly complaining about? Yeah, okay. Recommend implementing that post. So there was a question in the chat. Nunu asked, what if we create our own implementation of a JPA repository interface and we try to auto-wire the repository? Which implementation will be injected, ours or the default one? Implementation of a JPA repository interface. Spring will make sure that you get your own repository implementation. Hi, this tip avoids the exception but find by may then return wrong results. I had a similar situation with two eager associations translated to book example with the book B having two authors A1 and A2 and two reviews R2 and find by returned B having two reviews but four authors, and again, okay, the problem seems to be in this case incorrect generate SQL, like looks to be an error in Hibernate to use, because that should also be forbidden. Let's try that. So somewhere down here I have multiple, there it is, multiple join fetch. So we take a look at the book. We have a set author and a set review association. When many to many, one to many. Let me quickly check the script that generates the data. So we are fetching the book with ID 1, book. It has one author and two reviews. Okay, then let's add another book author here. So it's book 1 and author 2. So this would be the same example he's talking about. We have a book with two authors and two reviews. So if we now run this test case, we see that we get exactly, well, it didn't fail, we don't see what we got here. So log info B. I hope it has a toString method somewhere. toString, yeah, okay. Well, we see we get the book exactly once, right? So don't exactly understand the issue. But he talked about combining sets and lists. Well, my general recommendation is just use the set for too many association, especially for many to many. So, but let's change that here to a list and see if we can reproduce the issue. Don't expect that we will run into that issue, but let's give it a try. Well, it still works. Let's do a list of book. Get result list. List. font size. Yeah. Okay, now we got 4, and that is because I missed something. If we do it like this, we need to add a distinct. Log info b and 0 get authors size. So number of books. Okay. So why do I need to add a distinct here? I need to add a distinct here because if we join a book with the author and the reviews table, then in the SQL statement we get the book 4 times, at least in this case, because there are 2 authors and 2 reviews for that. So if you multiply all of that, you get 4 records in total. That's just how SQL works. And unfortunately, Hibernate maps that to 4 book entities, which are completely identical. There's no difference in the 4 objects, which is annoying. But that's how it is right now. So yeah, with the distinct, I now have number of books 1 and number of authors 2. That means that we have that also means we have a distinct here, and we don't want that because that forces the database to sort or to order the records in the result set and to perform the distinct operation, and that's expensive. So what we do now is we set a hint on the query to avoid that. What we do is we do set hint query hints and that pass distinct through that one. And we set it to false. That tells Hibernate to only apply the distinct internally and not to add it to the SQL statement. Yeah, we still see number of books 1, number of authors 2, and we see here no distinct. Okay. Hi, Hans Martin. Oh, now you can see my answer. I wasn't able to reproduce that issue. But what happens is you get the book entity 4 times if it's associated with 2 authors and 2 reviews. You can avoid that by adding distinct to your query and the distinct keyword to your query, and by setting the distinct, how that one called exactly, pass distinct through. Yeah, let's copy like this. I think the string representation for this one was distinct pass through in the query, but whatever. So via query hints you can access that easily by setting the to false, e.g., and then we do this. Get rid of the indents. Okay. Okay, we're done with that. Yeah. Okay, it's already 5 minutes past 4, and to be honest, I'm running a little bit out of time here. So I'm taking a final 1 or 2 questions here from the chat, and if you want to ask anything, then feel free to do now. And if not, then I'm closing or ending the stream in a minute or two. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. It would be great if you could tell me how you like the format of this. Was it useful? Was it interesting? Or shall you do something different next time? Okay, Vonera, thank you for the session. Yeah, thank you for joining. Same to David Ramirez. Steve Snodgrass asked, when Hibernate updates a child collection of entities, does it do inserts prior to updates? When Hibernate updates a child collection of entities, does it do inserts prior to updates? To be honest, I don't think, I mean, prior to deletes. Well, it doesn't update anything it has to remove, if that's the main question, Steve. Otherwise, I think that's not defined. And to be honest, right now I'm not exactly sure what the exact order is in that case. I'm relatively sure that's not defined. Okay, so feedback so far is that the format is interesting. So, well, that's great. And then I will keep doing it. Yeah, so I will be live next Tuesday again. Or make sure to follow the Thoughts on Java channel. We are pretty close to 19,000 subscribers, which is amazing. And then maybe if I have some time to spare, I will set up a quick stream every now and then. But otherwise, the plan is, at least for now, to do this every Tuesday. So Steve provided a few more infos. My issue is when I have a unique key on the entity, it inserts the entity first and I get a unique key violation. Yes, they are awesome. Okay. Oh, now I get it. So you have two child elements that, and you want to remove the old one and then insert a new one with the same key. Okay. Well, in that case, you would need to call the flush method in between. You would need to remove the entity first, call entity manager.flush, and then add the entity, the new one. But I would suggest that you just update the existing one. If you can't do that, then you need to first remove call a flush and then add the new one. Okay, that's what I do. Thought there might be a cleaner approach. Well, I would think about it, but right now that would be the approach that I would use as well, Steve. Okay, so I now take Shoma 2009's question, and then I'm sorry, but then I need to run. Hi, what is the strategy of Hibernate for generating POJO constructor arguments? Well, Hibernate doesn't generate any POJO the arguments order. Okay. So Hibernate. So if you have an example for that, that's easier to show. So now you should see the IDE again. Let me see. We have a JPQL constructor or something here. There. So we have a book value, and that one has a constructor with ID, title, publisher name. And I reference them here in the exact same order. So Hibernate takes a pretty basic approach, but let's be honest, that's the only approach that you can really take here. So we are referencing the ID, title, and name columns or entity attributes here. So Hibernate is looking for a constructor that accepts 3 parameters first one of the type of the ID attribute, second one of the type of the title attribute, and third one of the type of the name attribute. And then Hibernate iterates through the result set of the query and puts in these three, the three values that we select here in the SQL statement into that construct in exactly that order using reflection. So Hibernate puts in the ID, then the title, and then the name, and that's it. So it uses exactly the order that you defined there. Okay, so yeah, that's it for today. Thanks a lot for joining, and I hope to see you next week here again on the channel. Make sure to subscribe so that you get a notification whenever I announce or start a new stream. And hopefully, beginning of next week, there will also be new videos on a regular basis here on the channel. You know the current Corona situation, right? So the last few weeks have been a little bit chaotic. I was more or less caught between customer projects, online workshops, making sure that here at home everything works as expected, and so on. So beginning of next week, I hope that, or end of next week, I hope that we will be back on with regular videos. So Shoma says that I'm in a situation where I'm mapping my DB table using XML and we are generating entities with HBM to Java. Yeah. Well, Hibernate uses the default constructor to instantiate entities, and so there the order doesn't matter. And for POJO constructors, you can only instantiate a POJO within your query, and there Hibernate uses the order in which you reference the entity attributes in that query, in the constructor expression that I just showed. But I'm sorry, I need to run. Shoma, if you are still not sure about this, please post the question in the comments of this stream as soon as the recording is up. That might take a few minutes until YouTube has processed it. And then I will pick that question next week and make sure that everything is sorted out. Okay? Okay, then, yeah, thanks a lot for joining. If you like this format, make sure to join next week. If you need any project-specific support, go to thoughtsonjava.org and hit me up to schedule any kind of consulting project. There you can also find more articles and videos like this, online courses, and all these good things. Okay, thanks a lot for joining and see you next week. Bye.